brother-in-law hid a creepy "I love you" note in a gift, and then my mother-in-law tried to get me to live with him while my husband was recovering from a car accident. Back in college, I went to the same university as my now husband, Calvin, and his older brother, Austin. Austin was a year ahead of us. The funny thing is, I actually met Calvin because of Austin. I had a small, harmless crush on Austin, like a lot of girls did. Austin had a reputation. Everyone knew him as the playboy type. He was good-looking, charming, and always surrounded by women. I knew about this reputation, and even though I thought he was attractive, I made a conscious decision to not become another one of his playthings. I valued myself more than that. Of course, my best friend at the time found out about my little crush. And, as best friends do, she teased me about it constantly. It got to the point where pretty much all of our mutual friends knew. I'm pretty sure, though it was never said directly, that word got back to Austin himself. That's when things started to get complicated. Austin started flirting with me. In group settings, he'd be overly friendly, always finding a way to sit next to me or touch my arm. He got my phone number from someone and started texting me. He'd send these complimentary messages, saying I was girlfriend material and things like that. It was flattering, I won't lie, but I was also very skeptical. I kept reminding myself of his reputation. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was just playing a game. He also had this habit of saying, especially when he'd been drinking, that he wasn't ready for a serious relationship. He wanted to enjoy his carefree moments, he'd say. It was a huge red flag, and it reinforced my doubts about his sincerity. I was a pretty serious student. I spent a lot of time in the college library, studying. It was kind of my safe space. But Austin started showing up there, too. He'd always have some excuse, like needing help with an assignment or wanting to borrow a book. It was clear he was just trying to find ways to talk to me. It was persistent, and honestly, a little annoying, because I wasn't giving him much encouragement. Then there were the notes. Twice, he wrote me these notes where he basically confessed that he had feelings for me. They were pretty intense. But, here's the confusing part, when I confronted him about these notes, face to face, he'd backpedal. He'd apologize and say he didn't mean to make me uncomfortable. It was this constant hot and cold behavior that I just couldn't understand. I didn't have a lot of experience with relationships back then, so I was genuinely confused. I didn't know what to make of him. The real kicker came on my birthday, which was about a week before New Year's. Austin sent me this really heartfelt message. He said he was in love with me and that he wanted to be in a serious relationship with me. It was a complete 180 from his usual behavior. I was stunned. I actually asked him directly if he was serious, because I couldn't believe it. He said he was, and he even told me he planned to propose officially on New Year's Eve. We were all going to a mutual friend's party, so I guess he thought that would be the perfect time. So, New Year's Eve arrived. I got to the party, and Austin was there with his brother, Calvin. This was the first time I'd ever met Calvin. And let me tell you, he was the complete opposite of Austin. Calvin was sweet, a little shy, and definitely not the center of attention type. We started talking, and we just clicked. It was easy and natural. We had a genuine connection, right from the start. It's hard to explain, but it felt like I'd known him for a long time. The strange thing was, Austin avoided me all night. It was the weirdest thing. He wouldn't even make eye contact. After that big birthday message and a supposed plan to propose, I was expecting something. But he acted like I didn't exist. I was relieved, to be honest, but also confused. I planned to talk to him at some point, just to make it clear that I wasn't interested anymore, but I never got the chance. Later in the evening, I went into the kitchen to get a drink, and I saw Austin. He was kissing another friend of ours. It was a real wake-up call. It confirmed everything I'd suspected about his sincerity. He saw me, and he immediately looked guilty. He started apologizing, assuming I was upset. I asked him if we could talk privately. We went to a quieter room, and I just calmly told him that I thought it was best if we dated other people. I told him, straight up, that my crush was over. But Austin, he didn't take it well. He actually tried to blame me, saying I'd been leading him on. It was ridiculous. I stood my ground. I told him we were never in a committed relationship, and I had never explicitly told him I liked him. I ended the conversation by telling him he could think whatever he wanted, and I walked away. It felt good to finally close that chapter. The day after the party, I got a text from an unknown number. It was Calvin. He'd gotten my number from a mutual friend. That text message changed everything. He asked me out on a date, and I said yes. Before things got serious, though, I felt like I needed to be completely honest with him. I told him the entire story about. I didn't want any secrets between us. Calvin's reaction surprised me. He was incredibly understanding. He said it wasn't a big deal, that it was all in the past. His reaction was such a contrast to Austin's behavior. It showed me his maturity and his genuine kindness. Calvin and I started dating, and it was amazing. We fell in love. It was a real, deep connection, nothing like the superficial crush I'd had on Austin. Calvin became my best friend, everything to me. He was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. But the situation did not sit right with Austin. He was cold toward me, whenever he would see me. Over the years, Austin consistently found ways to interfere with our relationship. He'd insert himself into our plans. For example, if Calvin and I had tickets to a concert, Austin would suddenly decide he had to see that band, too, and he'd invite himself along. Or, if we were having a quiet movie night at home, he'd show up, wanting to play board games or do something else that involved everyone. It was like he couldn't stand for us to have any time alone, especially since, at the time, Calvin and Austin were living together. My resentment towards Austin started to grow. I talked to Calvin about it, telling him that Austin's behavior was weird. It was hard to ignore. And it wasn't like Austin was in a relationship himself. He continued his playboy lifestyle, sleeping with multiple women, so it wasn't like he was pining after me. Then there was the big brother talk. When Calvin and I started getting serious, having dinners with each other's families, Austin took Calvin aside. He told Calvin that he shouldn't get serious with me, that there were plenty of fish in the sea. He even tried to convince Calvin to sleep with other women. It was disgusting. Calvin told me about this conversation, and I was furious. It felt like a deliberate attempt to sabotage our relationship. But I trusted Calvin completely. I knew he would never do anything like that. After 2 years of dating, Calvin and I decided to move in together. It was a big step, and we were both excited. Austin, however, was not happy. He tried to convince Calvin to let him move in with us. It was incredibly awkward. I flat out refused. I knew it would be a disaster. Austin then started spreading rumors about me to our mutual friends. He said I was coming between him and Calvin, that I was controlling Calvin's life. Calvin shut that down quickly when he heard about it, but Austin's behavior just kept escalating. The worst incident happened at a bowling alley. We were out with a group of friends, and someone complimented me on my shirt. Austin, seemingly on purpose, spilled his drink all over me. Later, he apologized, but then he made this incredibly inappropriate comment, telling me I shouldn't wear revealing clothes around him. It was creepy. It made me so uncomfortable. I actually considered breaking up with Calvin at that point, just to get away from Austin's constant interference and unsettling behavior. Calvin and I had a serious conversation about Austin. Calvin, for the first time, admitted that Austin's behavior was indeed odd. He'd been dismissing it for a long time, but he finally saw it for what it was. We decided to distance ourselves from Austin. Calvin would still see him one-on-one if he wanted to, but I stopped going to any group gatherings where Austin was present. It was a necessary step to protect my own well-being and our relationship. Of course, our friends noticed the change. Word got back to Austin. And then, I received a long apology message from him. He said he was happy for me and Calvin and that he would stop interfering. And, surprisingly, he actually seemed to mean it. He stopped making me uncomfortable. We had a period of relative peace. Calvin and I got married. It was a beautiful day, a celebration of our love. But even at the wedding, there was a small red flag. Austin was Calvin's best man, and during his speech, he made a reference to his past crush on me. He framed it as a sacrifice he'd made for his brother. Everyone laughed, thinking it was a sweet gesture. But I was mortified. It felt like he was bringing up the past in a way that was inappropriate and unnecessary. Calvin didn't seem bothered by it, though, so I decided to let it go. I didn't want to cause any drama on our wedding day. Austin turned 30, and his family started putting pressure on him to settle down. His parents kept urging him to find a serious partner, but he always laughed it off. Calvin confided in me that he found it genuinely strange that Austin had never been in a serious, committed relationship. He said Austin was a good-looking guy, had a good job, and was generally a fun person to be around. Calvin tried to talk to Austin about it, but Austin just brushed him off. 2 years ago, Calvin threw me a small birthday party. Austin gave me a large, expensive-looking gift. He specifically told me to open it later, away from everyone else. That immediately felt suspicious. I agreed, and we moved on to other presents. Later that night, after the party, Calvin and I opened Austin's gift together. It was a heart-shaped box filled with chocolates, and in the center, there was a diamond necklace. Calvin was taken aback. He said it was a really inappropriate gift, something you'd give to a romantic partner, not your brother's wife. He tried to rationalize it, saying maybe Austin was just clueless about gifts because he'd never been in a serious relationship. But I could see the concern in his eyes. I put the necklace away in a drawer, trying to forget about it. About a year later, I was cleaning out my drawers and found the necklace again. I was just fiddling with it, and I discovered that it opened. There was a hidden compartment. Inside, there was a small, folded note. The note was in Austin's handwriting. It said, simply, "I love you." I felt physically sick. That night, I showed Calvin the necklace and the note. He was shocked at first, and then he got angry. We talked about what to do. We knew this could cause a major rift in the family, but we couldn't ignore it. We decided to call his parents. They were shocked too. His dad was livid, but his mother tried to defend him. His father shut it down immediately, telling her no matter what, that it was inappropriate. Calvin made the decision to confront his brother. His dad agreed. The next day, we invited Austin to lunch. We brought the note. We started talking about it gently, and then Calvin just put the note on the table in front of Austin. I watched his face carefully. I saw a flicker of worry and panic before he managed to compose himself. I told Austin that I found the note deeply inappropriate and that I couldn't let it slide any longer. Calvin asked him, point blank, if he had romantic feelings for me. He said it seemed like the only explanation for his behavior over the years. Austin started laughing nervously. He then launched into this elaborate explanation. He said he'd been secretly seeing a woman named Anna for the past year. He claimed he'd bought 2 similar necklaces, one for Anna and one for me, as a birthday gift. He said the note was meant for Anna, and he had no idea how it had ended up in the necklace he'd given to me. He denied having any romantic feelings for me whatsoever. Calvin and I were speechless. It was such an unexpected explanation. It sounded crazy, but it was also kind of believable. It was the sort of bizarre mix-up that could happen. Calvin, still skeptical, asked him more about this Anna. Austin gave us details, and then he showed us pictures of himself with her. She was beautiful, and Austin genuinely looked happy in the photos. It lent credibility to his story. I felt a wave of relief. Austin's explanation, and the photos, made sense. I was happy for him that he'd found someone. Austin apologized profusely and sincerely for the confusion. He promised to be more careful in the future. We all had a good laugh about it, the tension completely gone. We agreed never to speak of it again. It was a closed chapter, a weird misunderstanding. Austin eventually married Anna. She seemed perfect for him. They both loved adventure and seemed genuinely happy. But it didn't last. This year, Austin was caught cheating on Anna. He'd been communicating with multiple women on dating apps. It turned out Anna was also cheating, having an affair with a coworker. They decided to get a divorce, admitting they weren't compatible. Austin moved back in with his parents. He's been living there for the past 2 months. He also lost his job because of his depression after the divorce. He spends his days in his room, playing video games. Calvin has tried to intervene, encouraging him to find a new job, but it hasn't worked. Whenever Calvin and I visit his parents, Austin is always there. And he started paying excessive attention to me again. He'd get uncomfortably close when he talked to me. At first, I didn't really register it. I thought maybe it was just because he was depressed. But then there was this incident with a video game. Austin was teaching Calvin and me how to play one of his games. Calvin got an important work call and had to step away. Austin was showing me how to use the controller, and he sat very close to me. He put his hand over mine on the controller, supposedly to guide me. But his hand lingered there for much longer than necessary. It made me incredibly uncomfortable. I immediately got up and went to find Calvin. I asked him to take me home. He could tell something was wrong. On the drive home, I told him about Austin's handholding and how uncomfortable it made me. Calvin was furious. He wanted to confront Austin right then and there. But I convinced him not to. I was worried that if we confronted Austin while he was living with his parents, he might get kicked out, making the situation even more awkward. I was also afraid that my mother-in-law wouldn't believe me and would accuse me of causing trouble. I made a decision, though. I would never let my guard down around Austin again, and I would never be alone with him. Then, the unthinkable happened. Calvin was in a serious car accident. A truck hit his car from behind while changing lanes. It was terrifying. When I got the call from the hospital, I thought I might lose him. His parents, mother-in-law, father-in-law, and Austin, were informed, and they all rushed to the hospital. They were genuinely concerned, which I appreciated. Austin, surprisingly, was very supportive, constantly checking in and offering to help. My own parents, worried sick, flew in to be with me. Calvin started to recover, but it was a slow process. At first, he was only allowed one visitor at a time. I visited him every day. I'd read to him, play his favorite music, anything to comfort him. I was so incredibly grateful that he was alive and fighting to get better. His parents visited regularly, too. But a disturbing pattern emerged whenever Austin came with them. Instead of focusing on Calvin, Austin would direct most of his attention to me. He'd hug me a lot, touch my cheeks, and tell me to remain strong. He'd say things like, if anything were to happen to Calvin, he'd be there for me. It was so inappropriate and uncomfortable. I actively tried to distance myself from him, but it was difficult in the close confines of the hospital room. His mother would also encourage it, constantly mentioning how I shouldn't be alone. During one visit, Calvin, trying to lighten the mood, made a joke. He said that if anything were to happen to him, I could always be with his brothers, since they all look so similar. It was a terrible joke, and it hit me hard. I just went silent. Calvin immediately realized he'd messed up and apologized. But I broke down. Calvin leaned forward, despite his injuries, to comfort me. He was so concerned. I finally told him everything. I said I could never be with Austin because I didn't love him, and I never had, beyond that initial, silly crush. I told him how frustrated I was that people didn't seem to take my feelings seriously. I confessed my long-held suspicion that Austin had never gotten over me and that he still had romantic feelings. I told him about Austin's inappropriate behavior during the hospital visits, the touching, the comments. And I also told him that I believed my mother-in-law was aware of Austin's feelings and was actively enabling his behavior, turning a blind eye to it all. Calvin apologized sincerely. He realized how much I'd been holding in, how much of a burden I'd been carrying. He admitted that he, too, had long suspected that Austin had feelings for me, but he'd given his brother the benefit of the doubt for far too long. It was a huge relief to finally be on the same page. After a moment, Calvin came up with a plan. He said we needed to expose both Austin and his mother, and we needed concrete proof. The plan was for me to call my mother-in-law and ask for financial help with the medical bills. The idea was this: if she genuinely cared about both her sons equally, she'd offer to help without hesitation. But if she hesitated, made excuses, or attached conditions to her help, it would strongly suggest she was aware of an underlying. I agreed to the plan. The next day, I met my mother-in-law in the hospital cafeteria. I started by talking about how expensive the medical bills were, how worried I was about the financial strain. To my surprise, she immediately and unconditionally offered to pay the bills. I felt a moment of relief. Maybe I'd been wrong about her. But then, she dropped the other shoe. She said that I should move in with her and her husband, and Austin, until Calvin fully recovered. She said I shouldn't be alone in an empty house during such a vulnerable time. And then, she added, crucially, that Austin was lonely and missed his brother, implying that I could provide him with company. I felt sick to my stomach. The implications of her words were clear and disgusting. She wasn't just offering help, she was trying to create a situation where Austin and I would be living together. She, seemingly oblivious to how inappropriate her suggestion was, went on to further suggest that Austin and I could possibly work on a friendship, and how we are similar. She followed up with proposing I could get with him, until Calvin got better. I got up from my seat. I thanked her for her honesty and then revealed that I'd been recording the entire conversation on my phone. I told her I was going to share the recording with Calvin, that her plan was exposed. Her face went white. She started to panic, trying to backtrack. I accused her of knowing about Austin's feelings and actively encouraging them. She tried to calm me down, saying that falling in love is not a crime. She tried to justify her actions by saying she knows when her sons are in love and that Austin rightfully deserved me because he loved me first. It was an incredibly entitled and delusional thing to say. I told her I would let her husband know of this, and have Austin kicked out. I walked away. I refused to engage with her any further. I was disgusted and heartbroken. I had the proof I needed. I was really anxious and scared to share this with Calvin, though. Update 1. Hey Reddit, thanks for all the comments and support. It's been helpful to read your perspectives while I'm here at the hospital with Calvin. It's given me some strength to deal with all of this once he's out and safely home. I'm going to follow his lead on whatever he wants to do, but I'm definitely going to be open and honest with him about everything. I wanted to address a few things that came up in the comments. Some people suggested that I might have encouraged Austin's feelings in some way. I want to be clear, I did not. My initial crush on Austin was a typical, fleeting college thing. When I realized he wasn't my type, and that he was playing games, I respectfully told him I wasn't interested. Yes, I ended up falling in love with his brother, which I know isn't ideal, but it happened. I shouldn't be blamed for that. Calvin is the man I married, the man I've remained loyal to, and the man I hope to have a family with. I love him deeply. There's no part of me that has ever wanted to be with Austin, beyond that initial, superficial attraction. Also, some people asked about the financial situation. We never actually needed help with the medical bills. We both have good jobs and good health insurance. Asking for financial help was a plan to test my mother-in-law's reaction, to see what she would say and do. She fell for it completely, revealing what I'd long suspected, that she knew about Austin's feelings and was somehow okay with them, even encouraging them. I'm utterly disgusted by her thoughts and actions. I can never feel safe around her again. I realize now that she's always favored Austin, and she's been inappropriately encouraging his behavior for years. Update 2. Hi everyone, another update. It's been about a month and a half since my original post. Calvin is finally home from the hospital. He's almost completely recovered, which is amazing. I finally told Calvin everything about the conversation with his mother, including the recording. I waited until he was home and settled because I didn't want to stress him out while he was still recovering. His initial reaction was laughter. He thought the whole situation, his mother's plan, was so absurd that it was almost comical. But then I played him the recording. His laughter stopped. He was in pain, disbelief. He couldn't believe his own mother would say those things, would try to do something like that. He asked me why I hadn't told him sooner, and I explained that I was worried about his health. He understood. He agreed that we needed to confront his father about it. He was disgusted with his mother's behavior, and he was deeply disappointed in Austin. I was so relieved that he felt the same way I did, that we were on the same page. We decided to talk to his father-in-law, the next day. I was nervous about it, to be honest. This whole situation is so emotionally charged. Update 3. In just 1 week, our lives, and the lives of my mother-in-law and Austin, have been completely turned upside down. Calvin spoke to his father about everything. His father's first reaction was to apologize to me. He said he considered me as much his daughter as Calvin was his son, and I should never have hesitated to come to him with my concerns. He apologized on behalf of Austin and promised that Austin would never bother me again. He was so supportive and understanding. It meant the world to me. After the phone call with Calvin, my father-in-law immediately confronted Austin, who was still hiding in his room. He screamed at Austin. My father-in-law is a big guy, 6'2" and an army vet, so I can only imagine how intimidating that must have been. He ordered Austin to leave the house. He basically disowned him for his actions. My mother-in-law tried to intervene, to defend Austin, as usual. But my father-in-law delivered a scathing rebuke to his wife. He told her he was ashamed and disgusted by her outrageous plan and her enabling of Austin's behavior. He accused her of failing as a mother by allowing Austin to become such a pervert. It was harsh, but honestly, I think it was justified. He didn't stop there. He told my mother-in-law that she had to leave the house with Austin. Both mother and son are now effectively homeless. They're living in a motel. Both Austin and my mother-in-law have sent me multiple messages over the past few days. They're blaming me for the fallout with my father-in-law, accusing me of breaking up the family. My mother-in-law has been desperately trying to reach out to my father-in-law, begging for reconciliation. He's given her an ultimatum. She has to go to therapy to understand why she thought it was acceptable to encourage her son to pursue his brother's wife. Only if she goes to therapy and shows genuine remorse will he even consider letting her back into his house. Austin called Calvin, begging for forgiveness. But Calvin expressed his profound disappointment in Austin. He told him he was ashamed to have him as a brother. He warned Austin that he must never contact me again, or we would pursue legal action for harassment. The news of all this has spread throughout the extended family. Some relatives are shocked, but others have said that there had always been an underlying favoritism towards Austin from my mother-in-law. Calvin's extended family has been incredibly supportive of us. Everyone agrees that my mother-in-law's actions were incredibly inappropriate and weird. She's currently being shunned and taunted by the extended family. I also told my own parents everything. They were equally weirded out and disgusted by the situation. I just want to move on from this. I want to live a peaceful life with my husband. I'm grateful for my father-in-law's support, that he believed us. I truly believe that cutting ties with my mother-in-law and Austin is the right decision for our well-being and our future. All I want is to continue living my wonderful life with my sweet husband by my side.